Good evening, everybody. So my name is Peter Matheson, and I'm the principal of the University of Edinburgh, and I'm a bit cold and damp because I've just come from switching on the Christmas tree lights in Old College, accompanied by hundreds of people. I don't know, I was very surprised that so many people came. My task is just to welcome you. First of all, I'm going to try and demonstrate something which I had demonstrated to me about 2 minutes ago, which many of you will be familiar with, but that's flappause. So rather than applause, we're going to have flappause, which, if I understand it correctly, goes something like this. How did we do? It was okay, good. Thank you very much for coming to the inaugural Salvesen lecture. We have a number of VIPs here, and I'm just going to call them out. We have the eponymous Alastair Salveson, who gives his name to the centre and to the lecture. Alastair, founding donor of the Salvesen Mindroom Research Centre and a trustee thereof. We have Sophie and Robin Dow over here, who are founders and trustees of the Salvesen Mindroom Centre. Donald and Louise MacDonald, who have snuck right at the back up there, founding donors of the Ewan MacDonald Centre for Motor Neuron Disease Research at the University of Edinburgh. And Ken Muir, who's in the middle there, Chief Executive of the General Teaching Council for Scotland. So all of you are very welcome to the University of Edinburgh. My brief is to just welcome you, introduce flappause, which I've done. Welcome the British Sign Language interpreter, Rachel Amy. Thank you for being here, Rachel, with us. Christine Carlin is unable to join us, unfortunately, this evening, but the Salvesen Mindroom Centre founder, Sophie Dow, here will step in to speak in her place at a later stage of events. And so with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm just going to introduce Dr. Sue Fletcher-Watson, Director of the Salvesen Mindroom Research Centre, who's going to give this evening's lecture.
Thank you.
How to use this microphone?
I've got I'm all mic'd up. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm going to set a timer on my phone to make sure that I stick to time, because I know that's everybody's preference. So I am the director of the Salvesen Mindroom Research Centre, and it's my really great honour to give this inaugural Salvesen lecture. And the Salvesen lecture will take place every year, and we hope it will always be a paired lecture delivered by a researcher with someone from outside academia. So a practitioner, a parent, someone with a learning difficulty, for example. Because what we want to do is make sure that everything we do embodies this principle of engaging with the community and making sure that everyone's voice is heard in the work that we're doing. On that note, if you would like to tweet during the lecture, then I would encourage you to do so. That's my Twitter handle and our Salvesen Mindroom Research Centre Twitter handle. I'm going to start with acknowledgements because otherwise they get crowded out at the end of the lecture. So, as always, everything I'm going to talk about today is very much a team effort, and I want to recognise the contribution of many people listed here and others who I couldn't really fit on the slide, as well as our fantastic funders who support the work that we do. This is the structure of what I'm going to talk about this evening. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Salvesen Mindroom Research Centre and how it was kind of created. I'm going to describe where we are now in terms of our sort of research journey and what we're doing at the moment. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're going next, and I'm going to end with a call to action for everyone here today. So the Salvesen Mindroom Research Centre was founded as a partnership with a charity then called Mindroom and now called the Salvesen Mindroom Centre. I know that they've got very similar names and logos, and that's because they're very similar organisations. What we do together, and we do connected to each other. And in that sense, because this was an organisation that was founded as a partnership, it was founded on the principle that multiple voices matter and that we need to integrate multiple perspectives into the work that we're doing if we want to make a difference. We need to make sure we get outside our ivory tower and engage with the community in everything that we do. And I think we're building on that foundation, not just upwards, growing what we do, but also sideways, expanding the range of people that we're bringing into our work, expanding our partnerships with other third sector and community organisations and with other kinds of community groups. One of the first things that happened at the Salvesen Mindroom Research Centre under the auspices of the previous director, Anne O'Hare, was a priority setting exercise. And this was delivered in partnership with the James Lind Alliance. So what the James Lind Alliance does is provide a kind of formalized and systematic way for a research team to engage with stakeholders from a relevant community to work out what their priority questions are for research. So the process is about identifying what matters to people and refining that into a kind of top 10 list of priorities, which can then become the focus of future research. And what was really nice about the priority setting exercise for learning difficulties that was led by Anne is that there was significant incorporation of the views of children and young people with learning difficulties in that exercise. So here's a quote from Sam McGovern, who was a young person who was an ambassador for Dyslexia Scotland who took part in the process. And they say, "It's so good that young people have had as much of a voice in setting the top 10 as parents and professionals. Kids, as much as adults, know what is important when you have a learning difficulty." So as a result of that process, we ended up with a top 10 list, which I'm certain that you cannot read, which is why I have given you a summarized version. So just to run through this briefly, what we've got here in order from number 1 to number 10 is upskilling educational professionals to give better support, more evidence-based and targeted support to young people with learning difficulties in education settings. Working out what is the best environment to enable people with learning difficulties to thrive. Finding ways for professionals to integrate much better with parent perspectives. Identifying what are the best early interventions to apply at sensitive periods in development to have the maximum beneficial impact. Upskilling professionals from other related sectors, so health, social care, the third sector, for example. Providing direct support for parents and for siblings of people with learning difficulties. Identifying the early signs of learning difficulties so that we know what we're looking for and we can start to make a difference as soon as possible. Creating effective assessments for the precise nature of learning difficulties. Tackling stigma and bullying and victimization, which are unfortunately a frequent feature of people with learning difficulties' lives. And helping people with learning difficulties live more independent, or perhaps I should say more autonomous lives, with more decision-making capacity over what they do. So that's where it all started. Those are the foundations of the SMRC that we're now building on. And where we are now is addressing these questions with a range of research projects that are funded by core funding from Alastair Salveson's generous donation that founded the centre, but also funding from external funders that we've applied for. Now, I'll be honest with you, the arrangement of this slide was partly about the available white space. So each of these projects could really be linked to multiple questions, right? Most of the research projects that we're doing are relevant to more than one of our priority top 10 questions. And I just want to give a specific example of a project to illustrate that point in more detail. So this is the Beyond Behaviour study, which is being led by Gail MacLeod here at the University of Edinburgh School of Education with Martin Toy and Robin Dallas-Childs. And what they're exploring is what factors influence who gets a diagnosis of a behavioural disorder and who doesn't. So who are the children who get referred for assessment and who are the kids who end up with a diagnosis of something like ADHD, conduct disorder, or oppositional defiant disorder. And also, not just who are they, but what happens to them after that diagnosis. Because while we worry about the stigma associated with those kind of diagnostic labels, what we also know is that people who don't get a diagnosis just end up with a different kind of label, which is something like naughty or troublemaker. So we want to understand who gets referred for diagnosis, who gets a diagnosis, and what that feels like. And they're collecting data from young people, from teachers, and from parents, and combining qualitative and quantitative methods to explore the experience and meaning and consequences of diagnosis. So, through this new understanding that this project would build, we can address multiple questions from our top 10. So we can use this information to upskill professionals in education sector and other related sectors. Because the work is drawing on perspectives of young people and parents and teachers, it provides a platform for connecting those different stakeholder points of view. Of course, if we can understand the experience and the consequences of diagnosis, we can use that information to combat stigma. We can also use the factors that lead to diagnosis to help us advance early identification and assessment strategies. What are we looking for in these young people? Greater understanding leads to greater autonomy in the sense that knowledge is power. If we understand what people are struggling with, then we can empower them to make the changes that will benefit them. And we can also use this information to develop a more facilitative environment to allow people to thrive and flourish. So that's the kind of work we do, and this is a particularly nice example of it, I think. But zooming out to a more general level, I want to talk a little bit about our kind of vision and our principles as a research centre. So what we want to achieve is a world where learning difficulties do not mean educational disadvantage. And I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about what I mean by those things. And we want to adopt this research practice partnership model where we're generating new knowledge, both from research studies, but also derived and created by practitioners through their practice. We want to translate this information into action, making sure that we're delivering best practice that is evidence-based in our country. So what are learning difficulties? This is a term that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and there isn't really a single dictionary definition, and certainly not a single clinical definition of learning difficulties. A simple thing is to say things that make learning difficult. And an important contextualization for that is to say that these challenges occur within the context of an education system that is designed for what you might call the neurotypical mainstream, for the so-called average child, whoever they might be, who doesn't have a learning difficulty and around whom our educational strategies have been created. Learning difficulties may or may not be associated with a diagnosis. So, for example, autism could be characterized as entailing a learning difficulty, ADHD, dyslexia, developmental coordination disorder, developmental language disorder, and so on. But there's a lot of young people who will have learning difficulties that aren't associated with a particular clinical diagnostic category and are struggling in ways that they don't necessarily understand, and nor indeed do the people around them understand. Most learning difficulties are characterized by spiky profiles. So young people with learning difficulties will have areas of strength and areas where they're struggling more. And understanding those spiky profiles is essential because it's not just about addressing areas where people have problems, it's about using their strengths to enable them to achieve what they want to achieve. I'd say another thing about learning difficulties is that we think they derive from both individual and environmental and interactional factors. So let's take the example of a young person who struggles with working memory. That could be an internal factor within that child, but that's going to be exacerbated if they're learning in an environment with a whole load of distractions, lots of bright, colourful posters on the walls of their classroom, lots of other children busying around doing their thing. And it's also going to be affected by interactional factors like if their teacher is giving them multi-part instructions or interrupting them when they're partway through a task in order to encourage them to stay on task and ironically dragging them off task in the process. So these learning difficulties exist in the space between people and between people and their environment as well as in the individual. And that's where we need to tackle and focus a lot of our efforts. It's not necessarily on changing the young person, but changing the interactional environment that they sit in. So lots of people might say, well, of course a learning difficulty entails an educational disadvantage, because if you're finding it hard to learn to read, and reading is an important educational target, then that's the educational disadvantage you're going to get, and it's an inevitability. But there are a range of educational disadvantages that are experienced by people with learning difficulties that are not in any way an inevitable consequence of that difficulty. So we know that the 6 or 7 young people in every mainstream classroom in Scotland who has a learning difficulty are at higher risk of exclusion from school, higher risk of mental health problems. They experience greater and more intense bullying and stigmatization. Their participation in the classroom and in the community is limited. We know that there are ripple effects that spread out across the family, higher rates of stress and anxiety in parents and siblings. And we know that practitioners talk about a lack of training and resource to support these children and young people. We want to bring a number of kind of values to the way that we approach tackling this problem and this area of disadvantage. So I've talked already about how our work is directed by the priorities of the children and young people that we're aiming to support, and that we want to work in partnership with practitioners and with families. Of course, we're based at the University of Edinburgh, so we're definitely going to be delivering the highest quality, world-leading research and disseminating that across the globe, as well as implementing it in our local community and in the UK. We're committed as a centre to open science principles and to good citizenship and to looking after the staff who work in our centre and making sure that we're contributing to our scientific community by sharing not just our findings but also our data and our methods and so on. And we want to leverage the unique opportunity that we have through this partnership for maximum effect to create the biggest possible benefit. In terms of the voices that we need to hear to deliver this kind of work, you can class them as coming from three different main groups: practitioners, researchers, and community members with lived experience of learning difficulty. But each of these groups contains multiple people with different interacting perspectives and backgrounds. And so it's really quite a bit more challenging than it might appear at first glance to pull all these voices together and to make sure that we can respond to those different priorities. So how are we going to do this? I'm going to talk about where we're going next with the Research Centre and how we're going to start to address some of these problems. I'm going to talk about the new concepts we'll adopt, the new voices that we'll be hearing from, and the new pathways that we hope to follow towards implementing best practice. So anyone who's heard me speak before will not be surprised that the new concept we're adopting is neurodiversity, because it is my favourite concept. Neurodiversity, for anyone who's not come across this word before, simply refers to the fact that everybody's brains are different. And that variability is naturally occurring in the human population. No one kind of brain is more correct than any other kind of brain. No one kind of brain has more right to be here than any other kind of brain. That's a fundamental principle of neurodiversity, and that's one of the reasons why it's powerfully associated with the disability rights movement. And in fact, you can think of neurodiversity, like all the other dimensions of diversity, as part of our broader kind of equality and inclusion agenda. What's really important to emphasize is that thinking about the fact that everyone's different and that's okay is not the same as saying that no one needs extra support. So just because your brain is different, that doesn't mean you're a lesser person, but it also doesn't mean that you have the same chance and opportunity to thrive in a situation that wasn't designed for you. This is a project that we've just got funded from our core funding, which I'm really excited about, which will be one of our first projects explicitly adopting a neurodiversity framework in the SMRC. So the basis of this project is that neurodiversity provides a really positive framework for talking about learning difficulties. And we know that lack of understanding of what learning difficulties are directly leads to learning and social and health problems for people. We also know that teachers don't talk about learning difficulties because they don't really have the confidence, the vocabulary, or the resources to do so. So anecdotally, a lot of teachers talk about not having a conversation about learning differences until there's someone in the class who has a learning difficulty, is maybe getting what appears to the other kids to be special treatment. They're asking questions. There's this kind of challenging back and forth with a classroom of children. And at that point, it's really too late to have a reasoned conversation about neurodiversity and about learning difficulties, because it's become a crunch point and everything is about, you know, poor little Jimmy and his fidget spinner, right? So what we want to do is give teachers a toolkit to have this conversation before it gets to that crunch point with every classroom in Scotland. So we're creating a toolkit that is educating people, children in P5 to P7, so that's 8 to 11 years old, about what neurodiversity is. And we hope that by educating these young people about this kind of societal concept, we can have a ripple effect that engages also their families and their teachers and the broader community. I think it's quite like the materials that schools are already using to talk about things like climate change, for example. You know, a downloadable resource pack that a teacher can use to do a classroom assembly or to do some curriculum integrated tasks that educate the kids in that class about that kind of big picture issue. So in order to create this toolkit, we're going to be co-designing it with a co-designed team of neurodivergent practitioners. So they will all be people who work in the education sector, ideally in primary school settings, and who themselves have a learning difficulty, because they're bringing both their professional expertise and their lived experience to the table. We'll then do some pre-use checks with children, so working out whether kids in that age bracket understand all the vocabulary that we've used, they feel engaged with it, they don't think it's going to be upsetting or difficult for people in their class. We'll then develop materials with professional designers and evaluate them in primary schools, and then review and upgrade those materials in response to the evaluation and make them openly available for free for anyone who wants to use them. So that's our new concept, neurodiversity, and I now want to talk a little bit about the new voices that we'll be hearing from in the future. So participatory research is really dear to my heart. And what that means for me, most of my research has been with the autistic community, so what that means is working with autistic people, understanding their needs and priorities, and delivering meaningful research. And when I say meaningful research, I'm talking about work that is useful to people, that's respectful of their perspective, and that's kind. So there's lots of different ways that you can do participatory research, and you can pick the appropriate kind of technique that's suited to the question that you're asking and the project that you're doing. And that ranges from sort of consultation that's relatively kind of simplistic and targeted through to collaboration and partnership. And I've been really fortunate to also be involved in some projects that have been led by the communities that I work with. And that's fantastic. But normally this kind of participatory working happens on a per project basis. So each individual project that I do, that I seek funding for and win funding for, I would incorporate a participatory element, invite someone or a group of people to be involved in helping me deliver that project. And that relationship would then end at the end of the project, because I don't have funding or anything to continue it. But because of the unique way that the SMRC and the Salvesen Mindroom Centre partnership is funded, we have the opportunity to have a more continuous, integrated engagement with representatives from the community. So we're going to be creating a stakeholder reference group. And our hypothesis behind this is that if we can empower stakeholders from the community with lived experience of the things that we're trying to understand, and if we make sure that they know that we are willing to listen to what they have to say and to change the way we do things in response to that, if we combine that with high quality theory, methods, and research, we think we can create not just high quality evidence-based resources, but resources that people actually want and need, that are relevant to their lives. The third thing I wanted to talk about is the new pathways that we're following. So essentially, implementation is a really important part of the work that we're doing. And far too little research makes it into implementation. We normally stop at the dissemination stage. We tell everyone what we've done, and we hope that they will miraculously pick up our paper and decide to revolutionize their classroom practice in response to what we've written. For obvious reasons, that very rarely happens. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of projects that we're doing that are at different stages along this implementation pathway. So this is a project being led by Dr. Louise Marriott, who's a research fellow in the Salvesen Mindroom Research Centre, in partnership with a number of other researchers, but also Intelligent Mobile, which is an app developer. And this was based on work, in terms of new knowledge, this was based on work that Anne O'Hare and Marion Rutherford led, charting the experiences that families had with the diagnostic pathway in Scotland and the challenges that they experienced through that diagnostic pathway. So based on that research, Louise and her team are designing an app for parents to help them navigate the diagnostic pathway more effectively, the Helping Hand app, and that will be commercially released and available for people to use. Another example is the Managing Repetitive Behaviours clinical trial, which I'm leading an arm of here in Edinburgh. So this is based on evidence that shows that families are significantly impacted by children and young people who have very restricted routines. So an example would be a young person who has a 3-hour bedtime routine. And if you get one detail of the bedtime routine wrong, you have to go back to the beginning and start again. So those kinds of things have obvious negative impacts on family life. And as a result, the chief investigator on this trial, Vicky Graham, has designed an intervention which is aiming to educate parents and upskill them about these restricted routines and the repetitive behaviours that go along with them, so that they can provide support to their children in the way that they need it. Now, because this clinical trial is a kind of fully powered trial, we're going to be recruiting more than 200 children across 3 different sites, one of which is here in Edinburgh. If we can demonstrate that this intervention works, then we hope it will be picked up and adopted by the NHS and made available as a standard part of clinical practice. And that would be really exciting, because most support for children and young people with autism who have these kinds of challenges focus on the social and communication domain, and there's very little support for this kind of domain, even though, as I say, the research shows that this is a really impactful domain for families. A third example, led by Rachel Wood with the aforementioned Louise Marriott, has flipped the cycle a little bit, because this is about creating a new resource first and then using it to generate knowledge. So what they've been doing is working with a clinical database from the Child Protection Register here in Edinburgh and making that available for research. So the data were collected for clinical purposes, and that means that you have to go through a lot of kind of ethical and governance stages to be able to make it available and suitable for research use. But once we've been through all of those stages, we'll be able to scrutinise that database to look at what are the risk factors for referral to child protection services. And then we'll be able to use that information to change the way that we surveil people at risk of child protection issues. So those 3 examples make it look very simple to translate from research to impact in the community. But of course, it's not as easy as it looks. So I just want to dwell a little bit on how we can make sure that we're making a difference in people's lives. And I'm just going to do a quick shout out to Ali Irving, who organised this fantastic lecture. But it's thanks to her communication and outreach expertise that we're going to be particularly well placed to get our messages out into the community and make a difference. So we need to have really robust underlying evidence. If you're going to go to policymakers, whether that's at the level of MSPs or a head teacher deciding what to spend their budget on in their school, you need really high quality evidence that people can rely on. And then you need to tell people about what you've done. I think we also need to make sure that we're generating research from and within practice. So rather than it being me, the researcher in my lofty ivory tower, gifting my wonderful knowledge to the practitioner, instead we could have practitioners who are solving problems on the ground on a day-to-day basis, supporting them to formalize that knowledge and kind of develop that into robust evidence. I think we need to partner not just with practitioners and communities, but also industry. That's one of the most effective ways to implement things, as in the example of the Helping Hand app. And if we can do all of that, I think we can integrate in our supports into services as they are now. So that's absolutely essential. There's no point in creating a tool that's for some sort of ideal world that doesn't exist. We need to create supports that work within our education system, within our clinical system, within our third sector resource capacity. We need to make things that people actually want to use, so they're enthusiastic about picking them up and using them. And I think we can also do some work to deliver services on our doorstep. So I'm just going to go off on a bit of a tangent here. Sorry, that's our favourite. Can I just say tangent again? Tangent. It's nice, isn't it? Thank you very much. So I'm going to go off on a small tangent because one of the things I was reflecting on when I was writing this lecture is that, you know, we have this research practice gap, but it's kind of a false dichotomy, because for me as a researcher, I'm also a practitioner because I teach people and I supervise people. And so my research expertise is mostly in autism. And so what I've been doing recently is working with autistic staff and students at the University of Edinburgh to improve the way that we're supporting autistic people within our university. Because I have a responsibility to make sure that that research is being implemented right on my doorstep and not just out in some sort of remote community setting. So we have created an autistic peer support group. I say we, obviously the autistic people, I'm not part of it. We've created a reasonable adjustments checklist, which is being adopted by HR to support line managers and supervisors to be more effective supervisors of their autistic staff and students. And we're also delivering some training through the Institute for Academic Development on supporting autistic staff and students. So I think we have a responsibility to see where the need is right in front of our nose, as well as disseminating things out beyond our borders, as it were. So our priorities for the future, and drawing to a close soon, I just wanted to kind of run through some of the things that we're going to be looking to develop into as a research centre. So thinking about new knowledge, I think one of the things we want to move towards is getting away from diagnostic boundaries. So, you know, doing a project, ADHD project here and an autism project here and a dyslexia project here. Because what we do know is that most people with a learning difficulty will have more than one. Lots of people won't have a diagnosis associated with their learning difficulty. So if we pin all of our research to these diagnostic labels, we're not really addressing people's real problems. I also want to think about how we can take the robust, high-quality methodology that we use in clinical trials to evaluate a new drug treatment, for example, and embed that in community settings to evaluate new educational practices or new environmental adjustments. All of this is relatively slow, though. Research is slow. It takes a long time to deliver things that are useful. So we want to think about how we can start to make more of an immediate impact as well. So to that end, we're going to be publishing a book review every month on our website that will be written by someone with an expert perspective from the Salvesen Mindroom Centre practitioner team or the research centre's academic team. And these will be focused on books that are designed for parents of people with learning difficulties or teachers, for example, helping them understand, you know, is this a good use of my $14.99? Is this going to give me some tips that I can actually use in my home or in the classroom? And this is going to be useful to me. We also want to think about creating a pipeline to produce policy briefings from all of the work that we do, but also the work that we observe other people doing that we think is relevant to our community, so that we're distilling that work into accessible summaries with specific recommendations that people can implement. We want to create really active implementation strategies. So I've been working with Christine Carlin in the Salvesen Mindroom Centre to set up a framework for embedding students within the centre to do things like service evaluations or scoping reviews of relevant evidence to help support their practice. And I'd really like to seek funding for an implementation officer who would have a specific role to translate new research evidence into something that people can implement. So a toolkit that actually comes with an associated kind of resource list and a budget. How much money do you need to do this? How much training do you need to do this? And where are you going to get it from? That kind of thing. And of course, throughout all of this process, we want to make sure that we're listening to people. So as well as our stakeholder reference group, we've got an open door policy. My email address is on all of the slides, and I'm very Googleable because of my weird surname. So if you would like to get in touch about anything that you've heard today or anything that you see on the posters outside, I would really encourage you to do so. Okay, and on that note, I just want to say as well that we can't do this work without your engagement. So please, if you see us on social media, you know, let us know what you think, retweet what we're sharing, feedback to us if we've been doing work in your school or in your service. Let us know how it went. Let us know if you weren't happy with it. Too much research happens, sort of researchers, you know, breeze into a school and busy about for a few months and then disappear and you never hear from them again. And there are reasons why that happens, because research careers are choppy and stressful and people move on to a new role, but we want to make sure that we're doing better at the SMRC. So talk about us, talk to us, keep in touch, and let us know what you think. And at that point, I will hand over to Sophie Dow. Thank you very much.
And this is my script to prevent me from going off on a... Thank you, Sue, for that wonderful lecture. You talk very fast and very beautifully. I would like to talk about the crucial concept of time and about the importance of gaining time and dignity by early intervention and support. But before I do that, I would like to highlight the total opposite of that, and that is the passage of time. Because 16 years to be precise, plus the significant component of life's unpredictability, when that really works to your advantage. Because in 2003, when Mindroom was organizing its first international conference called See the Bigger Picture at the EICC here in Edinburgh, I had much to the despair of our then board, invited the entire psychology course from Durham University to come to the conference for free. Our chairman at the time, Morag Anderson, who is an accountant, was not happy. But my rationale was, and it still is, that it's really important to inspire and to involve the next generation because they are the ones that are going to take over from us. Anyway, one of those students was Sue Fletcher-Watson. And look, here we now are, with Sue heading up the Salvesen Mindroom Research Centre. Such is the power of early intervention. And early intervention and support is what we at the Salvesen Mindroom Centre constantly are working towards, as time is of essence for the children and the families that we are all here to help. The brain grows at a maximum during the first 2 years of our lives. After that, there is slower growth, and so the ideal time to detect and intervene would probably be then. But we are not there yet. We know that the major research challenges are to find new tools to make early diagnosis, and then to find what intervention would work best and when. At present, we are way behind schedule, as it often takes 2 years or longer to get an assessment and a diagnosis. That is too long. Those years are lost years to the child and to the family, and losing those years does something to you. The worry, the fear, the loneliness, the frustration, and the bewilderment. These emotions and experiences all leave their indelible mark in your heart and in the family soul. The key to reducing the worry, the fear, the loneliness, the frustration, and the bewilderment is to be listened to and to be included. And the key to that is collaboration. So let me talk a little bit about how we work at the Salvesen Mindroom Centre and what we do. I'm just going to find, I think that's the best one. In short, we work to support, to inform, and to empower all those living with learning difficulties. When Mindroom, as it was called then, first started in 2000, we identified that there were at least 5 children in every class in Scotland, in the UK, in the world, with some form of learning difficulty. Today, we know that figure to be what Sue said, 6 to 7 children in every class. Learning difficulties are widespread, poorly understood, often diagnosed too late or not at all, and the source of massive issues for those who have the difficulty, for their families, and for society at large. And if I mention that at least 80% of the young men in Polmont right now have experienced school exclusion, then you'll know how important early intervention is. So, in response to that high number, we, Salvesen Mindroom Centre, have developed our expertise and services to include working directly with families, we provide advice, we signpost, and most importantly, we provide one-to-one support, and always with the child at the center. We have developed an advocacy and support service for young people up to the age of 25. We support work placements for secondary pupils. We produce literature, training, and resources. And most importantly, we collaborate and we cooperate with partners in all sectors to expand our reach. Our team, who are all here and at the back here, has a wide-ranging expertise consisting of lawyers, social workers, teachers, graduates in biology, psychology, and art. We have a speech therapist, we have an OT, we have a journalist, and that's not me. We have a chartered accountant, and we have that all-important business and admin expertise. And since we started in 2000, we have helped several thousand families, but there are so many more that need our support. Our work has changed and evolved over these past 19 years as the understanding and the knowledge of learning difficulties have advanced, and we strive continually to update ourselves in order to keep pace and to stay relevant. We are constantly engaging with parent carers, children and young people and professionals, and we are constantly gathering views, opinions, examples of real-life struggles, and then we use this to inform the development of our own services. We use the lived experiences of families as told to us to inform policymakers and decision makers about the things that really matter to children and young people and their families. And we look very hard to find practical solutions and good practice, but we don't always have the answers, which is why we are so excited about the opportunities that collaborating with Sue and the University of Edinburgh brings us. To be part of the dynamic and pioneering Centre for Clinical Brain Sciences, which includes the Patrick Wild Centre, the Muir Maxwell Centre, the Anne Rowling Centre, and the Ewan MacDonald Centre, who all undertake fundamental and clinical research and then play a key role in translating that research into benefits to patients and the world at large. That is a privilege, and we are so excited about that. At Salvesen Mindroom Centre, we consider ourselves the gatekeepers between the academics and the population that the researchers want to work with. And through us, those children and families living with learning difficulties, they have a voice. One of the many professionals and experts that we work with, Dr. Svenny Kopp in Gothenburg, who has led 2 significant studies on girls with autism and ADHD, she always emphasizes that we must listen to the parents because they are the real experts. And that is true, we are, but we need all the help we can get. And it's only through collaboration that we can make and influence change and improve practice, which then has the power to change lives. So we aim at the Salvesen Mindroom Centre to change practice where we can. And let me give you a wonderful example of that. As many of you know, traveling is often a very, very stressful experience. So traveling with a child or a family member with additional support needs is hugely stressful. There are crowds, there are queues, there are passport controls, X-ray machines, loud noises, and threatening body searches. So when we saw a report in the papers that rated Edinburgh Airport service for passengers with a disability the worst of all airports in the UK, we took the initiative to contact them and offer our input on how to improve their record. We prompted the setting up of the Special Assistance Committee, which now involves some 15 charitable organizations, all providing their expertise for their specific population. Today, 3 years later, Edinburgh Airport have 3 services providing support for passengers with disabilities, and one of them is the Additional Needs Assistance Team, our team if you like, consisting of 3 full-time and 1 half-time member of staff who have all been trained to provide a bespoke service and assistance for passengers like our daughter Annie and her friend Lucy. And this photo was taken at 4:30 in the morning by me, I took Annie and Lucy, who were going to Madeira to celebrate Lucy's 30th birthday with 2 support workers to the airport, and we were met by Stevie from the special assistance team. I waved goodbye, and they breezed through the check-in, all the other checks. You can see there's a lot of people up at 4:30 in the morning there. They just cruised through, and it was wonderful. It's a win-win situation all around. As Edinburgh Airport's service for passengers with disabilities has now been ranked very good for the 2nd year running, the only airport of its size in the UK to achieve such a rating. Another wonderful example of collaboration is our latest booklet, which you all have in your bag, called Building Effective Relationships, which was commissioned by the General Teaching Council for Scotland, with whom we have a hugely important and constructive relationship. The purpose of the booklet is to bring together young people, parents and teachers by providing practical advice on how to build good relationships between them in order to support both learning and well-being. We work together with a reference group of young people with learning difficulties, parents, and teachers to identify the 5 most important things about communicating well together. It's interesting to know that the top 5 identified priorities were effective communication, empathy and understanding, education and training, honesty and transparency, practical information and support. However, it's also interesting to know that the young people, the parents and the teachers all put these 5 categories in different order of preference. For the young people, the top priority was empathy and understanding. For the parents, it was effective communication. And for the teachers, it was honesty and transparency. You can read all about it in your own booklet. Well, now, and in the interest of gaining time, I think my time is up. As you can imagine, I can talk forever about these issues that are so close to my heart, but I shall refrain from doing that and instead refer back to Sue, who is really in charge today. But before I go, I would like to say a few thank yous. So the first one is to the entire staff at Salvesen Mindroom for doing such important work with such insight, such compassion, and such focus. I would like to thank our chairman, Robin Dow, and our board of trustees for their dedication, their expertise, and their loyalty. And I would like to thank you, Alastair, and Elizabeth, who can't be here today, for making all this possible. Thank you also to you, Sue, and your team for this exciting work that we will be doing together. And finally, thank you very much to Edinburgh University for standing behind this pioneering partnership.
So good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Moira White and I'm head of the College of Medicine and Veterinary Medicine here at the university. I've taken an executive decision that we won't have any questions now in order to stick roughly to our timetable, but also because there will be a reception outside in which I'm sure both Sue and Sophie will be delighted to answer any questions that you may have. What I would like to do is invite Alastair Salveson now to say a few words. As I think people already realise, Alastair was the founder donor of the Research Centre here at the university, is also a trustee of the Salvesen Mindroom Centre, and I'm sure we'd all like to hear his thoughts for a moment or two.
I've never had to do a waving campaign before, but it sounds rather an interesting way to start. And perhaps I should just sit down and finish at that. But I think the important thing is to say, why am I here in the first place? I saw what Sophie had started doing, and I decided that what Sophie was planning and proposing with the mind room in those days was something that had very important legs to it. It was so important to broaden the number of people who were going to be helped. And I said to myself that the only way that that could work was if it was properly backed up with research. And likewise, if it also had the backing of the education departments, by that I mean schools, as well as the university, which is helping so much here with the research. But it also needed to help with the National Health Service, because the health service can tell people immediately where there are learning difficulties. And sometimes the way that we cannot pass information on about people because of privacy is actually harming us as opposed to the reverse. I take the view that the sharing of knowledge is power. It is not having the knowledge. Because the more people who know about things, the better. And it's only then, when they know it, and when there is evidence from research to support things, that we have the hope of moving it forward, not just in Scotland, but in the far wider communities. At the moment, we have this great base of the research here at Edinburgh University, tied in with the informatics department, which I'm so pleased we're in this building, because the knowledge and the way we can actually take data and make it mean more, so much more, is a thing that we desperately need. But then we also have the practical knowledge of what is happening with the Salvesen Mindroom Centre, as opposed to the research centre, getting out into the field. And far too often we find ourselves having to help people who are not being given the support they need from the local authorities, etc. There is a requirement for these people to be helped, but without evidence of what is wrong with them, they won't be helped. And we're always far too late helping people, and if it's too late, it means that people have all sorts of other social problems because they're so frustrated that they can't move forward. And the actual problems become worse because they're frustrated. They get other reasons why people should get annoyed with them, why they're excluded at school, etc. We need to get the help at an early stage. And I'm really pleased how we're working so closely with the General Teaching Council of Scotland. Thank you very much. Because it is with them we've put out booklets to every single teacher in Scotland. And now another leaflet has come out. So that is why I believe in what we're doing. And it's got to be a far wider group that are going to be having to help in all this work looking forward. Because this is something that can be transformational, not just to so many people, and it is about 20% of the people in every class. We need to make that change, and we need the help. We need to have the communication. We need to have people backing things up. So with that, we want to encourage always, instead of complaining of people what can't do, we always want to commend them for what they can do. Everyone has got some good in them somewhere, and generally an awful lot. But far too often we look at the negatives. And we must start looking at the positives. So I'm thrilled, and thank you, the university, for what they're doing with us here. I'm just so pleased that not only is Sir John Saville still on the board of the research area at the advisory council, but on top of that, Sir Darton with his whole team, which includes the Ewan MacDonald Centre, the James Lind Alliance, etc., is all supporting this and really working on it. So thank you so much for that. And now I'd like to actually just be in a happy position of giving a couple of prizes of commemoration. And the two people who have done the talking, I've done far too much. I was allowed 4 minutes, and I've done more than 4 minutes. And for Sue Fletcher-Watson, I would like to come, Sue, and could you like to hold that second? Was that you with? Which way around is it? There you are.
That's perfect.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Ah, thank you.
And I'd like to also do the same for Sophie Dow, who is, without whom we all would be here. Thank you. I seem to be the fortunate one getting all the kisses. Thank you.
Alastair, thank you very, very much. So, what I'd like to do now is to thank all our excellent speakers, Sue and Sophie, but also Alastair, for creating a whole that I think was greater than the sum of its excellent parts this evening. And another person we clearly must thank is Rachel, so maybe we could have another round of flapping. I'm amazed you kept up. It was deeply impressive, so thank you very much. So that brings the formal part of the evening to a close. We're going to have a drinks reception outside, and there are a number of displays that give you a great opportunity to see some of the work of the Research Centre and speak to some of the people involved. And my very final word is thank you to our audience for showing their enthusiasm on such a miserable evening and coming to this excellent event. Good night.